Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Challenges. Let's talk about it. So Challenges is directed by Italian director Luca Guadagnino, who also famously directed Call Me By Your Name, as well as limited series We Are Who We Are. Now, when it comes to my thoughts on Luca's previous works, I must admit, and this is crazy coming right off the back of a video talking about my unpopular opinions, but I have yet another one to share, guys, because to be honest, I have had mixed feelings about his previous works up until now. Even though I do think that he has a very gorgeous sort of artistic flair and style to his work, oftentimes I tend to classify his projects as vibe projects. Like his projects tend to be all about the vibe and not necessarily the plots itself, and that tends to put me off just a little bit, because I can get down with the vibe to some extent, but oftentimes I find myself a little bit disenchanted and bored by his work. So I'll put my hands up, okay, and admit that I'm not the biggest fan of Luca Guadagnino's directing style. At least I wasn't. At least I wasn't until I watched Challenges. Yes, I'm going to dive into my thoughts on his latest work in this video. But before we get into all of that good stuff, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe and turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Now, without further ado, guys, let's see what it is that exactly changed my mind. So Challenges is centered on this main trio of young tennis players, Tashi, Art and Patrick, and it follows their story throughout the years as they navigate their tennis careers as well as their interpersonal relationship. But essentially you have Art and Patrick, who are portrayed by Mike Feist and Josh O'Connor respectively, and they are childhood friends. They were friends from when they went to boarding school, and they have always played tennis together. They have a very fun friendship and relationship both on and off the court. But in the early 2000s, their friendship gets thrown a curveball. That's not a tennis reference anyway. It gets thrown a curveball because they are introduced to Miss Rising Star of Tennis herself, Tashi, who is of course portrayed by Zendaya. Now she is everything. Like she's a goddess of tennis. Like she's incredible. She's a young tennis protege, the likes of the Williams sisters, and she is very serious about her craft, but she also has time to, you know, have a bit of fun here and there in the form of mentally manipulating these boys, and like it's kind of hilarious. But when they first get to see her in person, she more than lives up to the legend of her incredible tennis ability. They see her in a match and it's just like breathtaking for them, and immediately they have these feelings stirring up inside of them. Whether those feelings are love strictly, it depends on the male, it depends on the boy that you're talking about, because there are differences between Art and Patrick in terms of how they feel about Tashi, as we learn throughout the film. But what we know for a fact is, at the very least, they both experience infatuation at first sight, and it carried on. It carried through the first 20 years of the 21st century. Now, throughout the film, we see how the relationship between this trio changes. Initially, you have Patrick being able to win over Tashi with his tennis ability, because he's always had that natural talent and gift for the sport, and so it's almost effortless in the way that he's able to play. And they have this sort of gamble one day, or one evening shall I say, where she comes up to their room and like chaos and madness ensues. We'll talk about that in a second, okay? But before leaving, you know, the boys are desperately hanging on to her every word and begging her to give them her number, and she's like, listen, I'm gonna give my number to one of you, the one that wins the match tomorrow because because they're due to play against each other the next day. And so even though Art had begged Patrick to allow him to win for the sake of his grandmother, because his grandma and everyone in her daycare center would be watching the match, so he begged him to take pity on him. But now that the stakes have risen, now that Zendaya's number is on the line, Patrick is like, nah, boo, like, you're on your own, like, you have to win this by yourself. And so they fight to the death, and Patrick ends up winning, and he actually ends up in a relationship with Tashi. But that all crumbles away months later when Tashi starts attending Stanford University with Art. We'll talk about that in a second. But she suffers a horrific knee injury that ends her tennis career in the most heartbreaking of ways, and she is absolutely devastated because this is someone who lives, breathes, eats, thinks, loves tennis so much. It's a part of her DNA. And it doesn't help that before this match that ended up ending her tennis career, she had an argument, a pretty bad fight with Patrick, and so he didn't actually attend that match. But you know who did? You know who was right there in the bleachers cheering her on? Art, of course. Like, Art was there cheering his best friend's girl on, okay, not missing a beat. And when she fell to the ground with her crooked knee, with her broken knee, he was right there on the court within seconds, jumping through literal hoops, well, not literal hoops, this is tennis, a literal net to get to her, because he is just absolutely madly in love with her. And as I said, he was attending Stanford University with Tashi, and so he got the opportunity to talk to her on occasion when he saw her around, you know, invited her to lunch, and he even sprinkled in some doubt, sprinkled in some toxic snake venom into Tashi and Patrick's relationship, because of course he had his own selfish motivations. So young Art may not have been able to beat Patrick and win the tennis match and Tashi's heart, but the second that he saw cracks in their relationship, the second that he saw that window of opportunity, he leapt right in. He leapt right in, he grasped onto that young girl, and he refused to let go. And so they end up together, they end up married and extremely successful, as Art asks Tashi to coach him in tennis, because even though he's never had that natural ability that Patrick has that makes him so effortless and talented, and it looks like he doesn't even need to try, well, Art has always needed to try. Art has always needed to try his hardest. But with Tashi on his side, he is able to propel himself to tennis stardom, whatever that means. But good for Art, you know, he seems to be getting those sponsorship deals. I'm sure he has some trophies at home. And of course, he has the ultimate prize, Tashi. He has created a whole extremely successful life with her, and they even have a daughter together. And so it seems like everything should be perfect. It seems like everything should be perfect, fine, dandy, happily ever after. But it's not quite as simple as that. Now, this film bounces back and forward in time across the roughly 20-ish year period. And in the present day, we find ourselves back again on the tennis courts with Art and Patrick battling it out. And it's only as events from the past start to unfold, whether it be a decade ago or even last night, that we finally start to realize what they're really playing for, what's really at stake. So that is pretty much the gist of the story, and as you can probably tell from my general comportment, from my general mood, I really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed this film. It was interesting because as someone who hasn't previously gelled with a lot of Luca Guadagnino's projects before, I didn't know what to expect going into this. I know that there was a lot of hype because of course this film stars Zendaya, and so the internet was abuzz, and especially because she's surrounded by these two white boys who are just absolutely sick with love for her, or at least infatuation for her, because in the case of Art, he is deeply in love with her. Like, this guy would just do anything He looks at her like she hung the moon and the stars in the sky. Like he is absolutely gone for her. Whereas in the case of Patrick, there's a different dynamic there where he obviously finds her really hot and he's, you know, physically attracted to her, and they also bond over tennis, but you don't really get the sense that he's as like deeply in love in the more like romantic traditional sense. So it's a bit of a different relationship there, although obviously there are still feelings involved, but it's a little less clear what those feelings are. And that's clearly where a lot of that drama and a lot of that like intrigue and perhaps even interest, okay, stems from within that relationship. It's the ambiguity that gets them turned on, I think. So yeah, even though the internet was abuzz with excitement for this film, I still had little niggles of doubt just because I haven't been the biggest fan of previous works by Luca Guadagnino, but this time around I am fully on board. Like, this is by far my favorite project of his, and I think it's mostly driven by the fact that this project had a very clear plot and storyline that I was completely invested in from start to finish. There were times where some things lost me here or there, which we'll discuss in a second, but overall this is the most compelling story from his that I have, you know, watched and I've really enjoyed. Now, before we get into the individual performances, of course we need to touch on the spice. Luca Guadagnino loves him some spice, okay? He loves him some homoeroticism. He loves him some spicy scenes. Now, this is perhaps yet another unpopular opinion, but I don't tend to love watching spicy, sexy scenes in cinemas. I'd rather watch that at home. I'd rather watch, and I know that sounds really prudish and like, oh, but yeah, like I would rather watch that at home. I'll say it with my whole chest, yes I will. And I had the same reservations about films like Poor Things, for instance, which I did eventually go see in cinemas because I just couldn't wait any longer. And I'm glad I did go see it, but yeah, I just feel a bit squeamish, like sitting in a dark room surrounded by strangers watching these saucy scenes. I'd rather be at home. And obviously there was a lot of hype surrounding the sauciness and sexiness of this film. I would say it pretty much lived up to that hype. Like there was, yeah, like there was enough sauce. Like the sauce was there, okay, for sure. Especially if Zendaya is like your dream girl. Oh, I'm sure you had the time of your life with this one. But for me personally, even though this story mostly centered on these two boys, these two white boys who are absolutely gagging over Zendaya, which for many of y'all is relatable content. But the most interesting relationship that, you know, I found in this film was that between Art and Patrick, and you know, the friendship that they had from when they were young. There's also a little bit of ambiguity there. They talk about this like really cute but extremely awkward story where Patrick taught Art how to jerk off. And you know, again, very cute, very awkward, but you get the sense that their relationship had some kind of blurred lines, and that's something that Tashi notices immediately as she says in her famous last words that she is not a home wrecker, and wreck that home she did. Wreck that home she did. But yeah, there are telltale signs that there's a little bit more ambiguity and again homoeroticism within that friendship than is first seen. And you also particularly get that sense from Patrick towards Art, because Art becomes just so deeply in love with Tashi, and he's just like she's all encompassing to him, whereas with Patrick they make it clear that his sexuality is more fluid, and so you do get that sense that maybe there was something there that he had for Art that was never fully explored, because a tornado whirled its way through into their lives in the form of Zendaya. And so there was no time to discover or explore anything else in that friendship because she just became the central focus. And speaking of pathetic fallacy, okay, and some clever storytelling devices, this film surprisingly had quite a few of them, but my favorite, or my second favorite after the tornado, after the literal manifestation of what Tashi did to their friendship and their lives, my second favorite is a line that Tashi says back in the day in a flashback where she explains why she loves tennis and what tennis means to her. And she says it's not about hitting the ball with a racket, it's about the relationship between the players. And that is the fundamental thesis of this entire film, of this entire story, because when you get to the present day match, you get an understanding of the ups and downs and twists and turns of the relationship that Art and Patrick have at that stage of their lives. And that's when you get fully invested in the match. You know, the match means so much more to everyone, both, you know, in the court, on the court, in the, I want to say, not the arena, not the stadium, what is it called? On the court, right? The people watching, to everyone who is in the audience, okay, to Tashi herself, who was there with her white woman bob, her wavy bob, and to the players, you know, that is when it all comes to a head. It's when we have the most understanding of the intricacies of their relationship, and that's where the stakes are the highest. And all of this is brilliantly conveyed not only through the dialogue and the story itself and what was on the page, but also by Luca Guadagnino's brilliant directing of this film. He makes some really cool directing choices and creative choices to fully emphasize, you know, when the stakes are high in the matches and in between the matches themselves, and also to visually manifest the characters' mental states. I think he does a really good job of kind of bringing what is inside of these characters, what they're thinking, how they're feeling, you know, onto the environment itself, kind of projecting it in various ways. Like I said, like the pathetic fallacy, for instance, using the weather to demonstrate the chaos within. Now, I will say there were elements of this film that kind of reminded me of Monkey Man, which was of course directed by Dev Patel, and I reviewed that a couple of weeks back. But in that review, I talked about how even though I really appreciated those creative quirks that Dev Patel brought as a director, at times it did feel like they were kind of throwing everything and the kitchen sink at us. And I would say that applies to challenges as well, where there were certain moments, sort of flourishes and camera techniques that felt just a little bit too much, that maybe we needed a little bit more of a breather, and it dipped its toe into melodrama a few times too many for me. So I would give that same critique as I did with Monkey Man, where sometimes less is more. But I do still appreciate the creative flourishes that he brought to the table, because I think for the most part they absolutely worked. In terms of his actualizations of the tennis matches, I wouldn't say that this is my favorite tennis related film, because that honor goes to King Richard still. Okay, I adored King Richard. I love that film so much. And so King Richard has yet to lose its crown as my favorite tennis related movie. But I would say that Challengers is probably like my second favorite. Although it might just be the second film about tennis that I've ever watched. Like just in general. So yeah, not much competition there. But I think the tennis matches were really compelling. Luca Guadagnino does some really cool stuff with the camera, you know, sometimes where the racket, sometimes where the ball itself. Again, when, you know, the stakes are really amping up and you get a better understanding of what these players are truly playing or fighting for, then he kind of, you know, plays around with the camera and these techniques even more to really emphasize the fast-paced movement of the match. And another flourish, another thing that helps bring emphasis to all of this is the music. The score of this film, which I think is really fun and like funky fresh. Like there's a lot of like dance music, hard-hitting dance music, which I think pairs really well with the tennis playing scene. Again, there are times when I think less could have been more in terms of both the music and the flourishes and everything together, because it does lean into the melodrama just a little bit too much. But overall, I would say that the music definitely works. It's a great match. Oh, it's a great match for the material. Okay, so finally, let's discuss the topic that you guys really want to talk about, right? Like what you guys really want me to talk about, and that is the performances. Okay, and we're gonna start off with Miss Zendaya herself, okay, who's actually also a producer on this film. So congrats to her. She's having a really big moment right now, coming off of the back of Dune Part 2 and of course Challenges, where she is the lead. Now, here's the thing. Some of you, very few of you, maybe one of you will know what my thoughts are on Miss Zendaya. And we have yet another unpopular opinion, I'm afraid. Please don't hate me if you're a Zendaya stan. Just maybe like block your ears for a second. But I have to say, I have to be honest, up until now, I hadn't really seen enough from Zendaya to fully understand what the hype was about. Acting wise, I understand that she's a fashion icon. Her work with La Roche is like really iconic and brilliant. So yes, she's a beautiful girl. She has great, you know, sense of fashion and style, and a great sort of persona that people find really relatable. So I understand from that perspective why she's so popular, and also because of light skin privilege, but we know we're not going to delve into that today. But in terms of her like acting, I had yet to see like a performance that kind of blew me away, especially in comparison to her peers. I mean, you have, speaking of Dune Part 2, Timothée Chalamet, who to me has demonstrated a lot more acting agility, whether it be from works from like Little Women, The King, Wonka, Dune. You know, Timothée Chalamet has shown a lot of flexibility and agility and range. That's the word I'm looking for, range, when it comes to his acting. And so has Austin Butler, so has Florence Pugh. Like, Zendaya's peers to me have shown a lot more acting agility than she has, considering how, you know, popular and famous and beloved she is as an actress. Although having said all of this, the project that she has been most acclaimed for is the one thing that I haven't seen her in and that is Euphoria, because I've never watched Euphoria and she's won 2 Emmys for that, so clearly she's doing something right. But when it comes to what I had seen of her, I had yet to be blown away. I thought she was good in the Dune movies, especially Dune Part 2, where she was actually present for more than 30 seconds, but it's not like, you know, so she's good. Like, but here with Challenges, this was her first opportunity to really show us what she was made of, and I have to say, I think she absolutely rose to the occasion, especially in the scenes where she was younger. I think she was really great as this cool girl who's just stunning and so cool and so untouchable, and she's a rising star in tennis. She has her whole future ahead of her, and she just has this kind of cool girl aura, like too hot to handle aura, and these guys are just gagging over her, literally just drooling, knees buckling, like it's just they can't believe that they're in the same room as this girl. And so I think she played that part perfectly, and she also played the part of this heartbroken, devastated young athlete who does go through this horrific knee injury. That part was also conveyed brilliantly as well. Where I thought she was slightly less convincing was as this, you know, early 20s mum of one who was extremely successful in her career because she was coaching her husband. That era that era of Tashi's life, I think Zendaya wobbled just a little bit, because I didn't find her quite as convincing as this, you know, 30-something-year-old woman as I did when she was playing this early teens girl who was a rising star in tennis. So, you know, I still have questions about my girl's range, my sis, like sis, like if you could just work on your range just a little bit, because I'm still not fully convinced by it. I think she's the type of actress where she needs a project that is perfectly suited for her to really shine, instead of the kind of actress that can kind of meld themselves into any projects that's put in front of them. And honestly, to be completely fair to all parties involved, involved. I would say the same thing about Josh O'Connor. I'm a huge fan of Josh O'Connor. I think he was brilliant in The Crown, and he was also in this indie movie with Letitia Wright where I thought he was also great. And so I was really happy to see him here. Like, his star is rising, like everything is working out well for him. Like, good for Josh O'Connor, okay? But I would have to say, after seeing him in a couple of projects, I'm starting to see his ticks, as they said in the film. I'm starting to see, you know, the little pieces of his character work, and it's become quite repetitive and recurring. He kind of has this sort of bashfulness to him, that is a sort of reoccurring sort of, again, tick or theme in his work. And so I'm starting to doubt his range as well. I'm critiquing all of these young successful actors from the comfort of my chair. But yeah, I'm just telling you guys what I see when it comes to these performances, and I am starting to see a little bit of repetition. So even though the character of Patrick has more of a gruffness and a dickheadedness and a sort of dirtiness, filthiness, brashness to him than Prince Charles did in The Crown, for instance, I still see a lot of connective tissue between the two characters, both portrayed by Josh O'Connor. So yeah, maybe Josh needs to dip into a completely different zone for his next project so I can fully make up my mind about what I think of his acting abilities. And then when it comes to Mike Faist, honestly, acting wise, I think he might be my favorite. I think he might be just a little bit, maybe. Although again, in the interest of transparency, I've only ever seen him in one other project, and that is West Side Story, the remake by Steven Spielberg, where he was phenomenal. And I said in my review, you guys never listened to me. I said in my review of that film that he was an icon, like he was the star, he was the moment, and no one listened to me, or at least someone did. Luca Guadagnino listened to me because he cast him in this movie. But yeah, Mike Faist is really talented, and I think the character that he played in West Side Story was completely different to Art in Challengers, so I'm seeing a bit more range from him. But you know, the jury is still out on all three of these guys, so let's see. But overall, guys, I had a really fun time with Challengers. Yes, there were moments where I did feel a little bit melodramatic, a little bit exaggerative, but overall I think it was very cleverly written. I thought the story was really compelling, and the characters were complex enough, weird enough, interesting enough for me to dive into their stories. I liked the tennis matches, even though I'm not the biggest fan of tennis and I don't understand it, despite the fact that I used to play it as a child and I hated every second of it. And I also liked the music. The music was a bop. The music was a vibe. Like, the music definitely helped amp up the energy of the film. So good on Luca Guadagnino and the music supervisors and whoever did the score, because I think it suited the film very well. And so with all of that being said, guys, I'm going to be giving Challengers a 7.5 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Challengers, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this movie down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.